hello, and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Podcast Studio. And today it is just Janet and I talking, no guests today, so you'll just have to listen to us, I guess. One thing that's been in our mind a lot, and we've talked about these before, but we're kind of putting it all together, is indicators of overall health without blood draws. So, Jan and I have talked about some of these things before. And one of them is that we've talked about a lot is balance, strength, and mobility. Janet, you want to discuss that? You're really good at talking about that.
Yes. So I agree with what Shawn's saying is that there are some markers as we age. And one of the things that creeps up, I think, as we go from our 30s to 40s to 50s to 60s is there's kind of a decade thing that creeps up at us and is our ability to maintain our balance. And that is super important as we are aging because many people don't talk about this, but when somebody falls in their 80s and 90s, a fall and a fractured hip is life threatening. And a lot of times, people that break a hip, it's downhill from that. I mean, their longevity is maybe a month if they're lucky, and if they do survive longer than that, it's very painful and uncomfortable. So the thing about it for me is that it's preventable. It's totally preventable, and that even includes things like our spine. You'll see people that have curvature of the spine, and a lot of that is preventable. And I feel like our healthcare or our industry right now in sick care is not paying attention to our balance, and so you shouldn't be curved over. It should be, our back should be straight. So there's some really important things with that because as we are walking and getting through life and being able to do day to day tasks, we should have upright mobility and we shouldn't lose our balance.
And I guess I should back up a little bit about why we're talking about these subjects. And I said without blood draws for a reason, because in our healthcare system, some of the most important things that are talked about our health, for one, being cholesterol. Cholesterol is going to make or break us when it comes to how long and how healthy we live. That's a complete scam. And there's many of those things are. It's like you don't need lab tests to say how healthy somebody is, and that's why we're talking about these, because balance is very important. And how do you increase balance, Janet?
Well, here's the thing is that we have to be proactive. I mean, it requires us as an individual to be responsible for that. So it depends on where you are in your age and how you are aging, but it's never too late to start today. But you need to work on it, and it means physically moving. And sometimes it can be just learning to stand on one foot, or just simple things. But don't let it escape you because it's not something you should accept. So basically, what I'm saying is, you as an individual are responsible to keep your balance. Now, that can be with exercise, that can be with diet. And so, Shawn, you have some thoughts about the exercise part, I'm sure.
Well, if you saw Janet a few weeks ago, we posted a video that kind of went viral a little bit with her doing one-legged box jumps. And here's what we figure. So if you can do one-legged box jumps, you can walk. And think about this: balance, mobility, and strength. When we lose our balance, we lose our mobility, and
Right.
we start walking with a walker or need a wheelchair. I don't remember the exact years that Dr. Sean Baker talked about when somebody, I can't remember if he was using a walker or a wheelchair, but basically, once you get to that stage, you've got less than 10 years to live, is what the statistics show. So if you can if you can jump on one leg, you're going to be able to walk on two legs really easily. So I always stress, try to overdo it so you can at least walk on two legs late into life. Um, so one-legged box jumps, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that everybody do that. Although box jumps, possibly if you're there, do two-legged box jumps and then graduate to one-legged box jumps. But even like Janet said, standing on one foot. Um, a good goal for people in their 50s, because most people in their 50s can't do it, put your socks on 1 foot at a time standing up. And if you can do that, you've got a relatively good balance.
Right.
Then you could graduate to box jumps, possibly one-legged box jumps. Um, so those are things you need, and those are things you need to do to maintain your balance, and also strength. I saw a stat last week about leg strength, that leg strength is inversely proportional to mortality. So what does that mean? As leg strength goes up, your mortality, chance of dying, go down. That shouldn't be a surprise, because think about us as humans hundreds, hundreds of years ago. If you couldn't walk, if you didn't have strong enough legs to walk, you're going to die shortly.
Right.
You can't even gather food, and you're going to die. So we shouldn't be surprised about that. So strength is very, very important. Janet, what would you suggest for leg strength?
Well, I mean, it's the easiest thing. If you can walk, walk, right? And increase the amount of time that you're walking because that uses every part of your body, especially your legs. And that's something we even, when Sean's training for his cycling, his coach will have him use walking for an alternative to help with his core. So, walking is super important. And I think in the past maybe decades or so, there's many fitnesses or fitness coaches and thing people out in the healthcare industry that have came around to say, yes, that's a really important thing to do. Now, I say we progress with it. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be just, something that's static, but certainly start with that. I mean, most people can do that. So if you can walk, set a goal, and that's the other part of it. Set a goal and then push further. And then as you are comfortable and you can do well, find some place where it's not just level. Find something that you can climb. I mean, make it harder, progress. But walking is always something that is a positive thing. In fact, um, I've had some of my employees just kind of look some little facts up about longevity and what countries are outliving us. And Japan and Hong Kong have longer average of lifespan, and part of it isn't just their food; it's also their movement. They, even though they live in a more urban area, they walk more than most of us do in the United States. So walking is super good, super helpful.
I mean, if you think about it, humans walked everywhere for hundreds, thousands of years. There
Right.
were no cars. So if you couldn't walk, you would die, essentially. So it is very important. But also, I will tell you this, I kind of like to go hyper walking or above that to make sure that you can walk later, a lot later in life. So, um, one way to increase leg strength and to make it so you can walk better is to jump. So we talked about box jumps, and you don't even have to do a box jump. Do a long jump. Just do a standing long jump in your house. You can do it on the carpet, in your house. Just jump as far as you can. Graduate up to that. You don't want to get injured or anything, but those are, that is a way that if you can jump like that, you're definitely going to be able to walk. Um, and some other things would be to sprint. I don't think you can um, talk enough about the advantages of sprinting, and we're going to talk about the importance of VO2 max here in a second. But that will increase your VO2 max, and walking will too, depending on where you start out at. Um, you
But
know, but
but just
long jumps. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
but just keep it in what you are comfortable and safely doing. Build on it is
Correct.
build
Correct.
from what you can do today to what you can progress to. And I think the progression is important because that does help. The jumping does help with your bones and your skeletal structure as well as your muscles and the stability of your brain and your core.
And you can do squats, do body weight squats to start with. If you're not up to using weight yet, just do body weight squats. Do 10 body weight squats, just, just body weight. And then as you progress, you can add weight. And think about that. If you can do squats with weight, then that means you're going to be able to get up off the couch or get up off the floor. and especially later on in life. So do these things, and then you will have more strength, mobility, and balance later in life, so you don't end up immobile and in a wheelchair.
So Shawn touched on a little bit about numbers and labs. And so one of the things that Big Pharma sold us is labs on DEXA scans. And I'm not saying there might not be a purpose or a time for a lab, but let's remember DEXA scans measuring bones is really measuring our bones, what is like back in time. So to me, that's like old news. And seriously, I think the only reason they came up with those numbers or the scan was to sell some of their drugs. And you don't want to take any of those. I mean, I personally will never take one of those medications because they keep your bone, but your bone is old. And bone should be just like every other tissue in our body. It's a tissue. It should be laid down new and the old removed. Because if you're on some of these medications, really what happens to your bones is it hardens. And then if you do fall, it shatters. So there's no way of rebuilding or fixing a shattered bone versus a broken bone.
So she's basically talking about the drugs like Fosamax and Actonel, also called biphosphonates. There's a couple other classes, Prolia and Forteo. Stay away from them. All three of those drugs are indicated for postmenopausal women. What do postmenopausal women lack? They lack hormones. So if you want to have strong bones, you'll stress your bones by doing sprints, by walking, by jumping, by lifting weights, and you'll have your hormones balanced appropriately. I want to talk about too about Dr. Peter Attia talked about appendicular lean mass.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I want to talk about the DEXA scan where Janet was a little bit negative about him, or a lot negative, and she was more talking about the bone density part with the drugs. And I
Right.
agree with that somewhat. I will say that a DEXA scan can give you a lot of good information. I don't think they're totally necessary, but I have done a DEXA scan partly to see what my lean body mass is, my muscle mass, my body fat, and my bones. I've done that because I want to be as optimal of an athlete as I can and have the least body fat possible and the most muscle mass. So, speaking of that, one of the ways that you can test appendicular lean body mass is on a DEXA scan. And appendicular lean body mass is, per Dr. Peter Attia, is one of the best indicators of overall health and longevity for a person. What does appendicular mean? Appendicular means your appendages, so your arms and your legs. So lean body mass or muscle on your arms and legs relates to overall health and longevity. Again, kind of like strong legs, we shouldn't be surprised because if you've got good muscle mass on your arms and you've got good muscle mass in your legs, you're going to be able to walk, you're going to be able to run, you're going to be able to lift heavy things. You're basically going to be able to do what you need to do to live.
Right.
So, and these things are important, especially when you're younger. And when I mean younger, I mean Jen in her 50s. That's when I mean younger, because I want to have good muscle mass in my 50s. So when I'm 80 and it's really hard to build muscle mass, I'm not this frail old man leaned over with osteoporosis. I
Right.
still want to be strong up until the day I die.
Right.
So that's why it's important to build these things early and do these things early so you can, as a woman, you can open a jar when you're 80 years old. You can get up off a couch.
Mhm.
You don't need a lift chair. You don't need a walker. Do these things when you're younger, and it's never too late, like Janet says, and then you don't end up that way.
Right. So there's different thoughts out there about the dangers of fat and fat cells. And so one of the things that we've heard at conferences, but we've known this too, is that there's different ways that we lay down fat in our body. And particularly, this is super important for women through peri and menopause. But what we are really worried about as a health marker is visceral fat. Um, we don't want fat everywhere. I mean, we need some. I'm not saying that we don't need some, and especially women. That's there's a place for it. But in our culture, it's over the top. And when we get visceral fat, basically it's saying that we're inflamed and that we are storing fat within our organs, which is not where we want the fat to go. And so it's actually a marker of overall health. Sean brings up a good point that we need to start early and we need to make sure that we maintain good health because it's that visceral fat that's going to kill us. And really in the United States, our biggest problems are things like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, but they're all super related because if you have less inflammation, your body's is able to repair and take care of itself and heal itself when it needs to or replace tissue when it needs to. If you're always inflamed, then there's so many other things that go wrong down the pipe because your body's saying, "Oh, I don't know what to do with this glucose. I don't know what to do with the insulin. I don't know what to do, so I just store this fat." And so that is part of the problem. I mean, Shawn already alluded to it that it's not just cholesterol. I mean, because we were told that about 30 some years ago that it was cholesterol. Well, let's face it, folks. If we had figured that out 30 years ago and we started prescribing statins to the world, why is it worse than it was before? I mean, it hasn't changed. In fact, the scenario is worse. So is diabetes. So is obesity. So I mean, we could be on this rabbit hole for a while, but really, a measure of visceral fat is super healthy, I believe, to understand that for yourself, and you can change that with diet and exercise.
And one of the ways, or the only way I know, besides postmortem, to measure visceral fat is with a DEXA scan.
Right.
A DEXA scan does do a good job of that. What kind of question we got? Good afternoon from Brooklyn, New York. Well, good afternoon to you. Thank you for watching and commenting. So now let's talk about VO2 max. We've talked about strength and the importance of
Mhm.
strength. And now we need to talk about VO2 max. What is VO2 max? VO2 max is the volume, the O2 oxygen max, the maximal volume of oxygen you can uptake in your body. And it is basically a marker of overall cardio, so your heart and pulmonary, your lung health. So cardiorespiratory fitness is really it's a good measure of that. Why is it important? Well, when you think about our day-to-day living, it's important to be able to do things that require good cardiorespiratory fitness, not just be strong. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to upset a lot of people, but um, there's there's a lot of fat, strong guys. You can see them in the gym. Go to a gym, and you will see a lot of strong guys that are fat. That doesn't mean they can run up a flight of stairs. It doesn't mean they can walk a mile, let alone run a mile. So their VO2 max might not be very good. So you can be fat and strong. But if you have a good VO2 max, so if your heart is pumping well and your lungs are moving oxygen well, the chances of you having metabolic disease are really, really, really slim. So, like type 2 diabetes, it's really slim. If you have a good VO2 max, you're going to have type 2 diabetes. Um, if you're a strong guy and you can bench press a whole bunch, you can squat a whole bunch, or you've got some big muscles and you look good in the gym, possibly, that doesn't necessarily mean you might not have metabolic dysfunction.
Right.
That's why VO2 max is a very, very important indicator of overall health that I think needs to be looked at. There's a few ways to check it. Janet, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I think we need to also dispel the myth that if you're skinny that you're healthy. Because there's many people that we know that can, maybe they have the ideal body weight, but their VO2 max is horrible or their strength is horrible, or I mean, there's the term is skinny fat,
Skinny fat,
right?
right?
And we actually had a colleague that he went and did some testing, and he was never, I mean, if you looked at him, he was never overweight, but his overall fitness was in the
Just
tank,
horrible.
right? And so let's remember this. Just because you're thin does not mean you're healthy. So and we do see that. Now, I think being thin in our cultures really uh misunderstood perhaps. So we're not just picking on one set of people, um, because it goes across the board. And I'm going to say this to women: if you are super skinny and you don't have muscle tissue and you're not taking care of your bones, you are at risk. You are more at risk than somebody else. So this is something to prevent. And you know, the sad thing about it is our medicine today that we prescribe for people, or our doctors or our system, is really sick care. So we're not helping people prevent things down the road. And if you're a thin lady and you have low muscle mass and you aren't moving and exercising, you're at risk for shattering and breaking a hip as you age. And it's life threatening. So don't take it like, oh, well. You really need to be preventive and be proactive.
Yeah, you're definitely at risk for osteoporosis and sarcopenia, which sarcopenia is loss of muscle mass or too little muscle mass, especially as you age. So, yeah, that's why strength and muscle mass is so important. That's why we were discussing this stuff, and build it as early as you can,
Right.
but it's never too late. So, VO2 max, some of the ways to measure VO2 max. Um, there's all kinds of fitness trackers now, whether it be an Apple Watch or whether it be Garmin. I use a Garmin bike computer to track mine. I've also done the actual VO2 max test, where it's the most accurate way, where it actually shows you, they put a mask on you and it shows
Mm.
how much oxygen you're actually moving. Um, it's a very, very intense uh, test. Um, there are some ways to estimate it, though. Here's this one, omnicalculator.com, and then look in the VO2 max. And it basically takes your resting heart rate and your age, and then it uses some calculation and estimates your VO2 max. I will tell you, I've had my VO2 max tested once by the mask thing. And right before I did that, I was looking at my Garmin, and the tests were different. And the online tests are different too. So, but it doesn't matter. They're going to come up with different numbers, but it's kind of like a number on a scale. One scale might be 2 pounds off from the other scale, but as long as you stay with the same scale, you're fine.
Right.
So, whatever way you use to measure your VO2 max, stick with that method, and you can start progressing it. There's charts you can Google VO2 max charts. There's different charts for women and men, and it's based on age. And you can look at those numbers. Like, for instance, you need a VO2 max of over 20 just to be able to live. So, if your if your levels is in the 20s or 30s, that's not very good at all. I mean, you're basically, it's not supportive of a very quality life, because it means you can't get up and walk around very well. So VO2 max is important, and the way you increase VO2 max is what people would call cardio respiratory fitness. So what cardio? So whether it be walking, whether it be running, whether it be biking, whether it be swimming, um, and depending on where you're starting is depending on where you start at is depending on what kind of intensity you do and
Mhm.
what kind of quantity and volume you do. So if you're starting at nothing, and you know go for a walk 5 minutes a day. I mean, that's the first goal, and then you progress that.
Mhm.
Um, Janet?
Oh, I totally agree. And if you need motivation and you have a pet, walk your dog. Everybody, if you have a dog that, pretty soon you're not going to realize how much more you're moving. So it doesn't have to be that hard, but you got to start somewhere. And I know, there's people that are going to say, well, I need to see my doctor before. Well, that's true, maybe in some cases, but doing something, especially if you're going to get from, throughout your whole entire house and be able to take care of yourself, you just start moving. And it's as simple as this. We've had other people say, well, walk around your house, like outside of your house, walk around your block. I mean, just keep slowly adding to it, and realize that, our heart is a muscle and it's super important to our overall health. And I know, like Shawn and I have kind of given the little forewarning here that, people have their opinions, but VO2 max is huge and it's really important. And our heart and lungs have a job to do for us, and we need to work on them because our lifestyle, let's face it, is not doing it. It's not getting the job done.
And in general, the lower the heart rate you have, if you look at that calculator, the Omni calculator, it's based on one of his calculations is heart rate, and the lower the heart rate you have, the higher the VO2 max you're going to have. And the reason that's important is because our heart pumps blood, and when your heart is strong, it can pump with one stroke a lot harder. It's no different than our muscles in our biceps or our legs. Um, it can move a lot more blood at one pump. So what happens when your body is deficient in getting blood out to the tissues, um, and your heart's not strong enough? It doesn't have enough stroke volume. It's not a strong enough pump. What does your body do? Your body responds with a higher heart rate,
Right.
because your body says, okay,
It's gotta work harder.
I need to pump a lot more blood to the extremities, so I'm going to increase my heart rate. So resting heart rate is actually a very good tool to for overall health. And the lower your heart rate is in general, unless you have some kind of cardiac condition, in general, that means the better fitness, the better overall fitness that you have, because your heart is a stronger pump, actually. So, Janet, how do we want to wind this podcast up?
Well, first of all, I think Shawn and I have talked about this a little bit, maybe a couple weeks ago, is that, nobody's going to come and rescue you. You're responsible for your own body and you get to make the decisions, which to me is very empowering. But even though it seems maybe small to say that movement can save your life, it really can. And as we age, it's even more and more important. I know for myself that my balance has changed and I'm going to have to work on it. But the way you do it is make a goal and keep moving forward, right? Start somewhere and keep moving forward. And I know it's possible. Shawn and I have seen some wonderful people in our life that I just totally admire. We have a lady that is a client of ours that teaches women, and she is 83 years, beautiful, moving, thriving. And the goal of that to me is not just existing, it's living, right? To the optimal that we can. And that means with our brains and with our body. And the only way we can keep doing that with our own self being in control is deciding to move.
And our brain health follows our physical body health. There's
100%.
just facts about that, and
Yep.
I don't need any study to prove that. It's just true. People that are more active physically are going to
Yep.
have better brains. I mean, that is just in general true. Um, so one of the things that you know I want to stress is that we started this podcast over 5 years ago, and our goal was to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health, just like Janet was talking about. We love empowering people to do that. We don't want people to rely on some kind of medication the rest of their life, for their overall health, because first of all, most medications are not healthy to take because they're poisons, literally. Um, so we want to stress that, your diet, your sleep, your exercise, you are in control of that.
Right.
You can control your own health by mostly those three things are what keep you healthy. Um, and focus on those to optimize your health. It's really that simple, just basic stuff. We just started streaming live on Rumble. So if anybody's not watching this on Rumble, please go and check us out on Rumble, or tell people that we are on Rumble. Um, we only stream. We also stream live on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. And we're really, stay tuned, because we are really trying to grow our podcast to get this out to the masses. So stay tuned for some big announcements over the next few days, maybe weeks. It just depends on when we announce that. So stay tuned for that. You're not going to want to miss it. There's going to be some really, really cool stuff that we're going to be announcing. So that's about it. Jen, do you have anything else?
Yeah, go out and live life.
That's
I
right.
I I can tell you right now, I take great joy in being outside when I can and just enjoying the earth that we were put on because we were made to exist in it and thrive in it.
And
So,
thrive, not just
yep,
survive, but
don't just
thrive.
survive, just live life and enjoy it.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday to our midweek scheduled podcast, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for listening.